am Dr. Joan Eakin, and I'm a retired professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Toronto, where I taught for many years qualitative research methodology and did my own qualitative research. I was also the founding director of the Centre for Critical Qualitative Health Research. Today, I'm going to be talking about the distinctive role of the researcher in qualitative research. Now, qualitative research is not like the science that you started learning about in elementary school at the science fair. It doesn't involve controlled experiments, testing hypotheses, standardized procedures, measurement and numbers. Qualitative research has a different approach to doing science, to understanding and explaining the world around us. It focuses on the quality of phenomenon and not on the quantity. It is used to study things that are not really measurable and do not follow invariant laws or have fixed properties. Mostly, qualitative research is used to understand human behavior and the social context that influence it. Rather than numbers, qualitative research works with words and observations and actions and texts and material objects even. In this short video, I will be introducing you to a core feature of qualitative research, the role and place of the investigator in the research process, a role quite different from it is in the science that you're more familiar with. I will tell you in particular about what the investigator actually does in one key phase of research when researchers try to analyze the data that are collected, data being the bits of information you have gathered to tell you about something, and try to make sense of them without using numbers and the usual tools of scientific study. Now, conventional research typically consists of predetermined, systematic, bias-free methods or procedures, which it is believed, if done properly, will produce results that are objective and trustworthy. In this model of doing science, researchers' imagination and creativity is loaded at the front end in deciding the research questions and in designing the study to answer them. During the conduct of the researcher's role is strictly controlled to avoid biasing the effect of his or her expectations or emotions or presence and the effect that they might have on the research outcomes. The researcher, in fact, must be removed from the process as much as possible to ensure that the procedure, if strictly followed, will produce truthful results. By contrast, in qualitative research, rather than being seen as a contaminant of the scientific method that produced validity, the researcher is seen as a source of insight and explanatory power. The researcher, not the procedure, produces the results. Here, the researcher is a crucial asset, not a potential liability, and is given free rein. Now, there are several reasons why the researcher is crucial in qualitative research. Unlike conventional research, qualitative research typically doesn't start off already knowing exactly what needs to be understood. Ideally, in many forms of qualitative research, the point of the research is not so much to answer questions as to find out what needs most to be known, what the questions are that need to be put in the first place. So the creative bit mostly happens during the study, not before it starts. Another key reason why the researcher is seen as crucial in qualitative research is that data, words for example, do not speak for themselves. In conventional research, what data signify is agreed on in advance at the outset. In qualitative research, this doesn't work so well because human beings act on the basis of meanings they attach to things. Meanings are not constant. They differ between individual people and in different contexts and at different times. For the qualitative researcher, this means that meanings can't be pre-assigned to what people say or do. Data always have to be interpreted by the researcher. Thus, in the same way, some of you might have heard about finding themes in qualitative data. In fact, there are no themes waiting for you out there in the data, self-evident in whatever you are trying to analyze. Findings are not found. They are creatively synthesized and constructed by researchers using their own experience and knowledge and insight. This gets me to what I have called the creative presence of the researcher. Here the researcher is present rather than absent, and creative in the sense of constructing an informed interpretation of the data and of what is going on. The creative presence of the researcher manifests itself and functions in analyzing data in many different ways. Let me give you 4 examples of what creative presence looks like in action, and illustrate with examples from my own research. First, a qualitative researcher analyzes beyond the face value of the data, the apparent surface meaning of what people say or do. The researcher goes beyond simply cataloging what research participants themselves say. For example, here's an example from my own research. In a study I did of health in very small workplaces, interviews with workers and employers included frequent reference to their workplace as being like a family. One could have just taken that phrase at face value and interpret it as being some sort of an expression of the place being supportive and caring. However, this turned out to be a very key piece of the data that I had. When I started to dig into what the term really meant, how it was being used, and why it mattered greatly, I found that it mattered greatly for the social relations of work and how health was or was not addressed in such work settings. It turned out to be a very complicated and nuanced statement that had much to tell me about how health figured in such workplaces. Creative presence is also found in the researcher's ability to consider everything as data. Data is not just what was predetermined before the research began as the official collectibles of the research. Physical and material and observations can tell you a ton about your research issue. For example, there are lots of examples in my research. In a study of the social organization of small businesses, which I was telling you about earlier, the owner's dirty fingernails suggested something key, that they worked alongside of their workers. An observation that played an important role in how workers and employers related to each other, and how health mattered, and how health matters were handled in the workplace. Another example comes from a study of the relationship between injured workers and the Workers' Compensation Board. I had heard from all sides what a complex and difficult relationship this is. One of the most significant moments in this study occurred when I went to meet with some of the Compensation Board adjudicators, the people who make the decisions on the eligibility of injured workers' claims for financial support. When I went to talk with them, I entered the building in downtown Toronto where business is conducted and where they meet with injured worker claimants. I was blown away when I saw what the place was like. It was a virtual fortress. It had bulletproof walls. It had consultation areas that had lockdown doors. I had heard about the tensions and mistrust surrounding work injury and compensation, but the elaborate security setup at the interface between injured workers and the system spoke to me in a way formally acquired interview data never could have. These observations became data in my study and informed all my further research. Finally, in all my studies, I always treat silence as data. What is not said, or the absence of something, can say as much as the opposite, and it can flag sensitive subjects, or it can flag elephants in the room. Now, the researcher's creative presence is also evident in another core feature of qualitative research, identifying and questioning assumptions that are implicit in the topic of research and in the data. What ideas and beliefs and logic underpin what people say and what they do? What is embedded in healthcare interventions and organizations? Qualitative research is positioned to uncover what these assumptions are because they're typically not explicitly and often not consciously known. For example, I once did a study of a new Ontario policy and program called Early and Safe Return to Work that involved requiring injured workers to go back to work early before they had fully recovered, as long as it was safe to do so. I found that the concept of safe in the policy and in the practices of return to work professionals contained an implicit assumption that safe only referred to the physical and material working conditions. The underlying logic of the policy did not include any notion of the social or the psychological aspects of safety, which turned out, in fact, to be the very types of danger producing the considerable problems the policy ran into when it was implemented. A final site of the researcher's creative input into qualitative research is the development or the growing of concepts for interpreting and making sense of data. Concepts are ideas that are expressed in more abstract terms that help describe or to explain what is going on. Such concepts typically are not known at the beginning, but are gradually brought to the surface during analysis. Researchers use a whole bunch of techniques to spawn ideas, to develop concepts that capture their interpretations of the data, including what is called reflexivity in qualitative research, self-knowledge, the capacity to recognize and to utilize for analytic purposes your own location, your own experience and relationship to what is being studied. In other words, you use yourself as data. An example is in the course of studying work injury and disability and the troubles of injured workers, my colleagues and I developed a concept called the discourse of abuse. The discourse of abuse refers to a widely held belief in the public at large and among those involved in workers' compensation and rehabilitation that individuals claiming public monies to offset misfortune will try to abuse or to take advantage of the situation and will claim support that they're not properly eligible for. The default assumption operating in the compensation system appeared to be that injured workers, like other insurance claimants or welfare recipients, will try to cheat the system, and that the system has to be designed to counter the tendency to take advantage of free money. However, although through qualitative research, I was able to get in the shoes of injured workers, and I saw that those assumptions were completely at odds with what injured workers themselves experienced and did. Injured workers were generally desperate to get back to work, and the social stigma of such assumptions caused them profound moral shame and suffering. Concepts are very powerful. This one was helpful in accounting for the great difficulties many injured workers experience in recovering and finding a way to salvage and resume their lives. Drawing on my background in sociology and studies of social stigma, I came to see that their behavior was a constant performance trying to establish their worthiness and their integrity. The unceasing need to prove their credibility helped explain why so many injured workers became permanently entrenched in their disabilities and in their lost lives. So, to wrap up, the main aim of this video has been to describe the key role of the researcher in how data get analyzed and findings get framed in qualitative research. The qualitative researcher goes beneath the face meaning of data. The qualitative researcher draws in all manner of data to cast light on the research problem, including themselves. The qualitative researcher identifies and questions core underlying assumptions and also develops concepts that can pull together and make sense of data. This is the creative presence of the researcher. More generally, though, the main purpose was to give you a feel for what it might be like to do qualitative research and to be a qualitative researcher. Although it's very challenging work, qualitative research has animated my entire research career. I have never done a qualitative research project that I didn't find rewarding or that wasn't interesting to do. Qualitative research, and in particular the creative role of the researcher in this form of scientific practice, has a bunch of personal perks. First, qualitative research has something important and distinctive and powerful to offer knowledge and practice in health and healthcare, which is very satisfying for the researcher. But also, it is intrinsically ever fascinating to do because it is never the same old, same old. It is always full of new surprises, and it forever turns what you think you know on its head. I encourage you to learn more about qualitative approaches to health research and to see for yourself what it can offer and how it can engage you. If you'd like to go further with things I have talked about here, there's a couple of places to start. The first is an article from my own research, which illustrates much more fully some of the things I've spoken about. The other is a classical sociological article that my students always loved by Becker that offers marvelous strategies for thinking about and generating ideas about research data. Really, it's about the creative presence of the researcher, although Becker didn't use that term. I hope this video has been useful to you. I have done qualitative research for over 45 years and I have never tired of it. I hope you might want to learn more about it. Thank you for watching.